It's Reggae Month, and we're taking you to the biggest reggae archive on the planet.
Turn it up. Flash got the 411. Only on the entertainment beat. Blazing talent from the Caribbean.
This is the first Jamaican record, and also Prince Buster's first record, "Oh Carolina" by the Folks Brothers, and it's autographed by John Folks, who wrote it. Welcome to the Reggae Archives, and come follow me and we'll check out what's downstairs. So let's begin the tour of the Reggae Archives with the Reggae Reception Chamber. These are reggae anthologies, and these are films that I've been in. I've made my living as an actor to support my reggae habit. This is a banner from Bali, where they make a whole lot of Marley clothing and memorabilia. And those 4 buttons come from Shashamani, the area of Ethiopia that His Majesty gave to repatriating Rasta. These cabinets have most of the flyers. And the other side of it is the correspondence that I have with people involved in reggae all over the world. And this documents the spread of the culture throughout the globe.
Now, Roger, I want to say it's indeed a pleasure and an honor to be here in the Reggae Archives. Tell us about how much space of the Reggae Archives occupies your home.
Half of it. 7 rooms, floor to ceiling.
Wow, 7 rooms.
Yeah, it was 6 in a guest room, but last year I managed to colonize the entire downstairs of the house. We've had to move twice, Flash, just to house the collection.
7 rooms. How many years would that take to amass such a collection?
Well, now it's almost 41. I grew up in New York in the 40s and 50s, and I was, first generation rock and roll, and I loved the doo-wop music, the harmonies, and in the 60s, the consciousness that came into the music with
Right.
Dylan and the folk movement and all of that. And by 70, the lawyers and the accountants had taken over the American music business and emasculated it. And a lot of us, aging hippies, were looking for something to reignite the fervor and the consciousness of the music we loved. And in 73, I read an article in Rolling Stone by a gonzo journalist from Australia named Michael Thomas, who said, "Reggae music crawls into your bloodstream like some vampire amoeba from the psychic rapids of Upper Niger consciousness."
Wow, so ever since then, you've been bitten ever since.
I said, I don't know what that means, but I got to find
Right
it. And I went out that afternoon where I was living in Berkeley, and I found a used copy of Catch a Fire for $2 1/4. The Zippo lighter one. And then the next night I saw The Harder They Come in a little tiny theater on North Side, and when the Chalice scene came on, the entire audience lighted up, and you couldn't see the screen for all the smoke. And on the way home, I bought the soundtrack. So that was a powerful 1, 2, 3 punch, and all I wanted to do from that point forward was to learn everything I could. And reggae leads you to so many different things. You learn about Jamaican history and politics. You learn about Ethiopia. You have to learn about the Bible. Reggae is a music you have to meet halfway.
Right.
And attention turns to interest, and interest turns to enjoyment, and enjoyment eventually turns to love,
Right.
and then love turns into proselytizing. I often call people like us reggae Mormons.
Maybe more.
Because they're always saying, "Man, listen to this, man. This is God's music."
It's always evolving. That's the one good thing about reggae music.
Yeah.
You have the largest Bob Marley collection. How did that get started?
The first issue of Rolling Stone that wrote about reggae. That became the initial piece as I look back in what is now known as Roger Steffens' Reggae Archives. Anything I came across, any newspaper, magazine article, or postcard, or a cassette, anybody else who had a collection, we would share tapes of each other's collection because it was so hard to find this music. Wow. There was a wonderful fellow named Ruel Mills, who had been a spar of Bob's in Trench, and he opened a small record store on Fillmore Street in San Francisco in the early 70s called Trenchtown Records. And he took these young, naive white guys like me under his arm and told us about I mean, the first records I bought from him were Count Ossie and the Mystic Revelation of Rastafari. Didn't even matter what the music sounded like. You bought the album for the name,
For the name, right.
And Ross Michael and the Sons of Negus and the Techniques and Alton Ellis and all these great people. He had an exquisite taste. And he also had access to the early Tough Gong pressings, too.
Oh, okay.
So he educated me. He was my first teacher. And a lot of the people who became disc jockeys in the Bay Area did so because of his influence and his sharing enough music that they could fill 2 hours a week on a radio show.
Right. Well, what was it, I guess, special about Bob Marley? Because I know there's a lot of different artists at that time that was doing reggae. What was it about Bob that spoke to you that made you want to continue with the collection?
Well, I was making my living in those days as a poet and performer, and I was doing a one-man show called Poetry for People Who Hate Poetry. So I had a huge audience, and it was all living American writers and E. Cummings, who I really loved. And it was Bob's poetry that spoke to me. I mean, the first time I knowingly heard reggae, not My Boy Lollipop or the Israelites, you know, but was the opening of Catch a Fire. And the poetry of this man's lyrics was so moving and so perfect and so concise. I mean, he could reduce the horrors of capitalism to a couplet. Good God, this illiteracy is just machined to make money. You know, keep people uneducated. You can pay them 17 cents an hour to make Nikes in Indonesia.
Right.
And, you know, there's Bob putting it in its most essential form and informing the world of what they need to know to reject the oppressors, the downpressors, as Bob called them. So I was attracted to the language even before the beat, but there's the subtle power that reggae has because it is the beat of the healthy human heart at rest.
It's kind of hypnotic, too.
And even if you can't understand the words, you know that he's a rebel and he's singing about, you know, tearing down Babylon. And people have, around the world, sought to learn the English language so they can penetrate Bob's songs, just as happened with the Beatles.
Right.
And the Beatles and maybe Dylan are the only people I could possibly compare Bob and Bunny and Peter to.
What is it about reggae music that appeals to you?
Oh, so much. The call to a higher consciousness, the call to live life in a loving and peaceful manner. It's reflected in those twin militant albums of Bob, those masterpieces that began with his first solo album with Natty Dread, Burning and Looting. I feel like bombing a church now that I know the preacher is lying. Who's going to stay at home when the freedom fighters are fighting? Well, that changed after the assassination attempt, and he mellowed a bit.
Right.
And I was on tour with the Wailers for 2 months last year, and every night I would tell the history of the Survival album and the meaning of the lyrics, and then they'd come out on stage and play the whole album live. And it got me really thinking a lot about that album. And what he had finally come to toward the end of his life was the belief that in order to change the world, you have to change yourself first.
True.
And that change is the one love philosophy, which is the only way that the world is going to heal its wounds.
Also, don't forget we have the Caribbean Star on the Rise and the top 5 reggae songs of the month.
And I love him so. Needle to the heart, he won't let me go. He won't let me go. Ooh, homie, I'm in love with the Sensi boy. Whoa, and I love him so. Needle to the heart, he won't let me go. He won't let me go.
There's a girl living in my neighborhood. Excuse me, pretty lady. Nice to meet you, my name is Jamire. Ever since you moved right around my way, my eyes been blessed by your beauty, girl. And I just wanna know, do you have a man? Shawty, for you and I have plans. Here's my number, let me know if you're interested. There's a girl in my neighborhood. Everybody wants her and I want her too. But I too much so and too much watching. I'm trying to get to her, but everybody's watching. There's a girl in my neighborhood. Everybody wants her, but me want her too. But I too much so and too much watching. I'm trying to get to her, but everybody's watching. Aye. Whenever she walks by, everybody with Abe side. All me dubs, them want to get a piece of her pie. My friends, them broke them, they can see where she's walking. The crew wanna know, who is she talking to on a mobile phone? So I went into the market and bought a dozen Uzis. Walked up to her and said, baby, all this.
And your top 5 Caribbean reggae songs.